I remember the exact afternoon my son told me it was time for me to move into a nursing home. The sunlight was coming through the kitchen window, landing on the same wooden table where I had packed his school lunches for 15 years. I was 65 years old, not helpless, not confused, just slower than I used to be. My knees ached sometimes, and my hands trembled a little when I poured tea, but my mind was as clear as ever. Still, Daniel stood in front of me with that careful, rehearsed tone people use when they think you're fragile. "Mum," he said, avoiding my eyes, "it's just safer this way. Safer." I had heard that word a lot in the weeks before that conversation. His wife, Melissa, liked that word even more than he did. Every time she visited, she would walk through my house with a tight smile, glancing at the stairs, the rugs, the cabinets, as if the entire place were some kind of trap waiting for me to fall. "You live alone," she would say. "What if something happens?" But what she really meant was something else entirely. I could hear it in her voice, see it in the way she looked at the house. My house. The house my husband and I had built 40 years earlier, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck. When Daniel finally told me their decision, Melissa stood beside him with her arms folded, nodding slightly like a judge approving a verdict. "We already found a place," she said. "It's very nice." That was the moment I understood something important. They weren't asking, they had already decided. I looked at my son, the boy whose fevered forehead I had cooled with wet towels, the boy whose broken bicycle I had fixed late at night so he wouldn't see me cry about the cost, and I realized he believed he was doing something responsible, something practical. He didn't realize what he was about to lose. I nodded slowly. "All right," I said. Melissa blinked in surprise. She had expected resistance, maybe tears, maybe an argument. Instead, I simply stood up and poured myself another cup of tea. "Whenever you think is best," I added calmly. Daniel looked relieved. Melissa looked pleased. Neither of them knew that, at that exact moment, I had already made my own decision, because there was something they didn't know, something I had kept quiet about for many years. $12 million. That was the value of the investment portfolio my husband had left me before he died. Stocks, property shares, and a quiet trust fund that had grown far beyond what either of us had imagined. We had never told Daniel about it. My husband believed money could change people. He used to say, "Let him build his own life. If he knows what we have, it will always sit between us." So we stayed quiet. After my husband died, I stayed even quieter. Daniel believed I lived modestly on a small pension and the savings from my husband's construction business. The truth was, I could have bought 3 houses like the one I was living in without touching the principal of my accounts. But I never said a word, and now as my son calmly explained the benefits of the nursing home, the nurses, the meals, the security, I realized something almost painful in its clarity. They thought they were sending away a burden. What they were actually doing was removing the only thing protecting them from the truth. 2 weeks later, they packed my belongings. Melissa handled most of it. She was efficient, almost cheerful, deciding what I should keep and what should be donated. "You won't need much there," she told me, folding my sweaters into a suitcase. I watched quietly. Some things she didn't notice me slip into my bag. A leather folder, a small envelope, and a set of documents that had been sitting in my desk drawer for years. The papers that proved the $12 million belonged entirely to me. The day they drove me to the nursing home was strangely peaceful. The building was clean, bright, and surprisingly calm. A nurse welcomed me warmly, and the room they gave me overlooked a small garden. Daniel carried in my suitcase. Melissa stood near the door, already checking her phone. "Well," she said with a polite smile, "this will be much easier for everyone. Easier." I sat on the bed and nodded. Yes, I said softly. It would be, just not in the way she imagined. For the first few weeks, I observed everything carefully. Life in the nursing home was not the sad place many people imagine. Some residents were lonely, yes, but many had stories that would fill entire libraries. There was a former pilot who still described storms he had flown through in the Atlantic, a retired teacher who recited poetry from memory every afternoon, and me, the quiet woman whose son had kindly arranged for her to live here. But I wasn't idle. A week after moving in, I made a phone call. The man who answered had known my husband for 30 years. His name was Mr. Carter, and he was the lawyer who had helped manage our investments. When he heard my voice, he sounded surprised. "I was wondering when you might call," he said gently. "I need to make some changes," I told him. "Significant changes." Over the next month, we arranged everything carefully, the $12 million, the house, the remaining assets, every piece of it. Then, one afternoon, Daniel came to visit. He looked a little uncomfortable sitting in the nursing home lounge, surrounded by wheelchairs and quiet television noise. "How are you adjusting, Mum?" he asked. "Oh, very well," I said. He looked relieved again. "Good," he replied. Then he mentioned something casually. "We're thinking of selling the house," he said. "Melissa thinks it's too big to maintain." Of course she did. I smiled gently. "That might be difficult," I said. He frowned slightly. "Why?" I looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Because it isn't yours." The silence between us stretched for several seconds. Daniel laughed awkwardly. "Well, technically it will be eventually." I shook my head. "No," I said quietly. "Not anymore." He stared at me, confused. That was the moment I handed him the envelope. Inside were copies of the legal documents, the transfer of the house, the redistribution of the trust, the letter from my lawyer. Daniel read the first page slowly, then the second. His face turned pale. "What is this?" he whispered. I folded my hands calmly in my lap. "It's the truth," I said. "The $12 million, every asset I owned, everything your father and I spent our lives building." Daniel looked up at me, his expression somewhere between shock and disbelief. You gave it away?" he said. "Yes," I answered, but not randomly. I had spent the previous month visiting every resident in the building, listening to their stories, watching who had family that visited and who didn't. Some had children who came every week, others had not seen their families in years, and some had been placed here for the same reason I had: convenience, loneliness disguised as responsibility. So I created something, a private fund. The $12 million would be used to improve this nursing home and others like it. Better medical care, private rooms, activity programs, scholarships for nurses who actually cared. Daniel's voice trembled. "You gave our inheritance to strangers." I looked at him carefully. "No," I said, "I gave it to people who needed it." He ran a hand through his hair, overwhelmed. "Mum, why didn't you tell me you had that kind of money?" I smiled sadly, "Because I wanted to know who you were without it." He didn't answer. A week later, Melissa came to visit with him. This time she didn't look confident. She looked furious. "You had $12 million and you never told us?" she said the moment she walked into the room. I simply nodded. "Yes." She laughed bitterly. "And now it's gone?" "Not gone," I corrected. "Used." She looked like she might explode. Daniel remained silent beside her. Finally, Melissa asked the question she really wanted answered. "Why would you do that to your own son?" I looked at Daniel again. Then I spoke the truth I had been holding for years. "Because the day you sent me here," I said calmly, "you showed me exactly how much family meant to you." The room went quiet. Daniel stared at the floor. Melissa said nothing. And in that silence, The real secret was finally revealed. The money had never been the most valuable thing I owned. It had simply been the test. And now I finally knew the result.